Okay, we'll wait just a minute to get everybody in. I think we're all here. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Kathy Ewing, the director of the South Asia Institute, and I'd like to welcome you all to our continuing series of masterclasses that the South Asia Institute has been sponsoring over the last year. We began the series at the height of COVID and isolation, as you all remember well, to give students who are interested in South Asia at Columbia, across a number of disciplines, the opportunity to meet our faculty virtually, since all of those kinds of everyday opportunities for meeting people were closed off to us. So we had many of the faculty spoke last year, and most of them are recorded. So if you are interested in hearing about the work of other people, you can access them through the South Asia Institute website. The format has been basically for people to give us a sense of their own intellectual history or intellectual autobiography, or however they choose to interpret that task. So they're actually quite varied in format, and it's always a delightful surprise to hear how it actually emerges in the actual interaction. Professor Spivak, I haven't introduced her yet, but anyways, Professor Spivak was supposed to speak last spring, but at the very last minute, in fact, I think after I'd given my introduction, we decided to cancel it because of the student strike, in solidarity with the strike. So we are really delighted that she can join us today. Professor Spivak is University Professor of Humanities and a co-founder of the Institute for Comparative Literature and Society, which was founded to help move interdisciplinary conversations between area studies into cross-regional and comparative studies. Professor Spivak got her BA in English Literature from the University of Calcutta, followed by a PhD in Comparative Literature at Cornell. She has numerous honorary degrees from universities across the globe. She came to Columbia in 1991 after holding a series of named professorships at several other American universities. Professor Spivak is a self-described paradisciplinary ethical philosopher, contributing to literary criticism, feminist theory, and post-colonial theory. She's a prominent voice in the study and translation of the works of Derrida, and she has dubbed her own approach to deconstruction as interventionist. She's contributed to the Subaltern Studies Collective, and I should add that my students last year found her 1985 essay, Subaltern Studies, Deconstructing Historiography, especially helpful as a critical assessment while we were reading several scholars connected with the collective. One of her most influential essays, of course, is Can the Subaltern Speak from 1988, which she's continued to return to in her own thinking, as we can see in her 2010 essay, Looking Back, Looking Forward, in the volume Can the Subaltern Speak? Reflections on the History of an Idea, which was edited by Rosalind Morris. Hopefully, you've all seen the link to this that was provided. Bill Carrick sent that out to those who had registered. And there's also an excerpt from her 1999 book, A Critique of Post-Colonial Reason Towards a History of the Vanishing Present, which in her email message to me, she called the final version. I assume you mean the final version of the this idea of
No, the essay itself. It's the final version of Can the Subaltern Speak. It's
Yeah.
quite different from the 88, the first
Yeah,
one.
yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah. So sorry if I wasn't clear. And I'll just say a couple more things. I don't want to take up too much time, but according to Edward Said, her former colleague at Columbia, Professor Spivak has, quote, pioneered the study in literary theory of non-Western women and produced one of the earliest and most coherent accounts of that role available to us.
I have to say that I told Edward, couldn't you give me theory itself? You had to put me into non-Western. You know, this is so typical, so typical. Put me in a hole. Anyway, all right, carry on.
Good point. Okay. Fittingly, she's also a social activist. And I remember talking to her on the phone once when she was in the midst of a project in rural India. She's involved in rural education and feminist and ecological social movements since 1986, and a few other things that she may or may not mention today. So just one more thing. I've only touched on your incredibly renowned career, and I haven't mentioned the extraordinary range of books and articles that you've published. But I do hope that if you feel like it, you can take the opportunity to talk about some of this yourself. And I hope, however you choose to use your time, that we will learn more today about something that you wrote to me in an email last spring when we were arranging this and talking about Can the Subaltern Speak? You said it's certainly not the same person who wrote that back in 1988. So with that, please join me at least in thought in welcoming Professor Spivak.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, very personal, wonderful. I should tell you that para-disciplinary thing, I have always regretted saying that. I said it when I drank. I mean, I gave up completely drinking in 1989, and it was right after a talk when one hits the bottle little if one drinks. And it was in an interview, and I think that was really a strangely self-congratulatory description. It's often picked up, but well, life is like that. I did.
Sorry to have picked it up.
I did say it. I want to begin by thanking Surya Parekh, who got up at 3:15 in the morning and drove in from Binghamton, where he teaches, and helped. He's an old student, very dear friend. He's just got a contract on Black Enlightenment with Duke. Look out for the book, solid book. But at any rate, he actually helped me put together the screenshot fillers, for which many thanks, Surya. And I should say something also about my background. I mean, I don't mean my personal background, but what's in the back. It's the Hudson River, 1 block from my apartment. I'm not there right now, of course, it's the background, but the photo was taken by me because I often walk down there simply to feel calm. And you know, those wonderful rocks, they are full of mica, they shine. And so I just wanted to share that with you. I wanted to have some calmness this morning for reasons that I will not go into. Now, Bill Carrick has told me a million times, and Bill, really, thank you too for really managing this so extremely well. It told me a million times how long this session can go. Is it 12 o'clock, Kathy, more or less? Okay, that's
yes,
what.
Yes, I think it sounds good.
All right. Now, what I have outlined for myself, I'll share with you so that you know that if it seems interesting to you, it would be best to keep the questions brief and to the point, okay? So first, I want to talk a little bit about where we are now, that is to say, climate disaster. Work from there, and I'll read a little bit of Mahasweta Devi there. Then that's the first bit. It'll take time, and there'll be a little bit of Q&A right after that for me. And then the second bit is Can the Subaltern Speak? And that also is all around Can the Subaltern Speak? Because it was a beginning, not an end. And so I'll talk about that. And then I will ask for some more Q&A, text related. I'm very sorry, I haven't had the time to reread the final version, and I haven't had the time to reread Roz's essay. So please make your questions text related so I can see what you're talking about. And then the third bit, because I'm going to be 80 in February if I live that long. So the third bit is a little bit about my life as it relates to how and why I came to the United States, why I only have an Indian passport, etc., etc. And that thing takes me right at the end to Du Bois and his work with African Islam, which is not known because it's the very end of his life. It's in the collection that is there in Ghana. And that's where I end, okay? And my last item in the notes I made was artificial intelligence as intellectual labor saving device. So that's where I want to end, and I would want to give a full summary and have some general questions and answers. This is too much for the time we have, so I wanted to share how I had perceived of this conversation. So I want to begin with the end of a piece I wrote for the Los Angeles Review of Books. No, this is not it. So yeah, what's happening? Can you get me to that? If you're a co-host, can you get me to? I keep pterodactyl, but I want to.
Oh, if you stop your screen share, I can put that paragraph up.
Okay. What is it called again? The file?
It's called filler _ masterclass.
Okay, fine. Put it up. Okay. So here it is. Right after 9/11, I wrote a piece called Terror, a speech after 9/11, which was, this piece was about 9/11, okay, in the Los Angeles Review of Books, which was reprinted immediately in Russian, German, Italian, and Spanish, and is now included in my book, Aesthetic Education. I tried to read, and for me, read means a very specific thing, which I won't go into now, suicide bombing. Now, domestic terror envelops us much beyond that question. It takes in COVID and climate change, climate disaster, I should say. Even as we understand domestic terrorism upon a chain of displacement from 9/11, it has also gone into a politics of excess, beyond fear, into the horror of planetary extinction. The US seeming to join in the contamination of the world beyond horror as we stagger into the loss of the centrifugal forces that kept us balanced in space. The separation of a pessimistic intellect and an optimistic will, which is always given to Gramsci, was never more than a liberal formula, not Gramsci, but Gramsci quoting Romain Rolland. The culture of fear is a culture of vendetta that is no longer feasible in a threat to the planet, that does not respect difference or punishes only the culpable. It does not respect difference or does not punish only the culpable. We are now being played out by a greater narrative, whatever we are doing, by a greater narrative where human accountability is way short of trivial. 9/11 is as unimportant there, since I was writing about 9/11, as the Copernican revolution, the Platonic solids, the Sphinx's far gaze, or the Great Wall of China. Live with it until there is no living. I wanted to begin with this, it's very recent, and this is my point. So I want now to go to read Mahasweta Devi's Pterodactyl. I think this is the one, yes. I've highlighted, why is that? Wait a I've highlighted some passages there, and the pterodactyl, I've asked, I will be happy to provide files of the actual novella, both in English and in Bengali. The English is actually readily available online, but in Bengali, if you put in your name with Bill, then I will send Bill the attachment, and Bill can share it with you, the Bengali one. The pterodactyl draws forth from Puran, who's the protagonist. He's a regular journalist, activist journalist. Now, this is the important thing, the difference between planetarity, which is what I was describing in the LA Review thing, between planetarity and our responsibility to the Earth. Because planetarity doesn't care about human accountability. I mean, but in order to be prepared to respond, to access the pterodactyl, which is a Mesozoic animal imagined as having descended into an Adivasi, into a tribal area, that's Mahasweta's novella. In order to access the pterodactyl's message in his imagination, to read it, as I said, read means something else for me, here it is, to read it in an act of imaginative activism, Puran has to be prepared. So in the story stages the preparation of a mere investigative journalist into someone who can respond to this staging of planetarity, which is the pterodactyl from the Mesozoic era. Puran has to be moved in the piece, and this is how we read literature. Everything is staged there for us to transact with. He has to be moved from the political to the literary. He's ready, for he's already, quote, romanticizing. This room is telling me, this is a quote, in my own translation, or I am grasping this as I've entered this room. This is sensed in the blood. It flows in the blood from generation. And then he says to himself, Puran, don't romanticize it. And the first step, therefore, here is to show that he does not know. When I come to talk about my own work with the landless illiterate in the border of Birbhum and Jharkhand, as they call themselves, SCSTs, when I talk about it, you will see that this relates to the work, to show that I do not know how to access them as a metropolitan upper middle class caste Hindu person. That's where I'll come to that as well. He does not know. As he sleeps in an empty dwelling, the rains finally come and end the drought. Puran walks to the forbidden shrine room. This is how Mahasweta stages his not knowing. Filling the floor, a dark form sits. The creature is breathing, its body is trembling. I could talk about trembling a little. Mara de Janeiro talked about it last night very beautifully. Puran, another former student who's written a fantastic book, Puran backs off with measured steps. A bit later, Bikya, the boy who drew the pterodactyl, looks at him in deep expectancy, and Puran understands nothing. You notice I have modified my own translation, because as you read, you begin to understand the text a new way, and you realize when you translated it first, you didn't quite understand it. So Puran understands, it's funny that the sentence itself, Puran understands nothing. He weeps. Shankar tells him, Shankar is the only literate Adivasi. You have brought this rain. You see, that's the answer. That's the correct answer. You have brought this rain. The people of Pirtha are now in your debt. And finally, an explanation from his friend Harisharan. People who have nothing need miracles. So this is his own class explaining to him. For now, it's through you. Now a story will be put together from voice to voice. The story will become song, and the song will enter the history that they hold in their oral tradition. This is the middle class explanation. But of course, Puran is being staged as entering this so that it's not an outside explanation. But we, the reader, readers needed. Bhikhya, the subaltern, and I always follow Gramsci's tiny definition, social groups on the margins of history. Bhikhya takes agency. The subaltern taking agency is a big deal in Gramsci, but let's not go there. Bhikhya, the subaltern, can now take agency because he knew the answer and Puran is staged as not knowing. He establishes a pact of secrecy with Puran, and Puran starts to address the pterodactyl. And the object of knowledge, which was pterodactyl, Puran was reading up on the pterodactyl, has become a subject from whom a response is sought. I should tell here that I often cite a title that I gave to the old, perhaps the oldest, not continually running, that's Bologna, perhaps the oldest university in Europe, Coimbra, when they honored me by asking me to address the initial class of PhDs in sociology. I'm social sciences and I'm a humanist, to address them about how to work. And I gave them a title where I outlined what a humanities person learns about working, intellectual working. And it was called Knowing, Learning, Listening, Hearing, Doing, ? And the move from knowing to learning, knowing where you must work very, very carefully, every detail, everywhere, all documentation. The object of knowledge is out there, you know it. But then comes a moment, and for many, many people, it never comes. Then comes a moment when you enter into the terrifying place of learning, when what you are trying to know takes on something like a subjectship and begins to demand a response of a different kind. So here, what's happening is the object of knowledge, the pterodactyl about whom Puran is reading up, we are shown how Puran does, has become a subject from whom a response is sought. What do its eyes want to inform Puran? Corporeality constructed of the gray dust or this liquid darkness is altogether still. This is what the story says. There is, in fact, no communication. Puran constructs in his imagination the possibility of a response. This, I can't go into too much detail, but this detail in Mahasweta's writing has to be felt in our own transactional imagination in order to follow her in what she's trying to teach us. Only an unfamiliar smell, sometimes sharp, sometimes mild. When Puran stands or Bhikhya stands, the smell turns mild and faint. Some inbuilt perception for self-protection from unknown beings. There is no circulation eye to eye, only a dusky waiting, without end. What news does it want to give? This is a quote, translation modified. And then Mahasweta offers the distinction. This is very important, between extinction by planetarity, which is completely without any sense, can't have. I mean, we are talking about the planetary system, and anthropocentric extinction as imagined by Puran, trying to quote, read what the pterodactyl's message might be. The first sentence in my quote is about planetarity. The rest about our responsibility for killing our Earth. Please allow me a long quote. This distinction between planetarity, where we can do nothing. We are plagued by that narrative and we've brought it along by our anthropocentric behavior. And this, but the next part is our responsibility. Okay, so Puran is imagining the response from the pterodactyl. We are extinct. Puran is trying to speak as the pterodactyl. This is very much the learning mode, the literary mode. We try to enter the space of the other rather than just talk about our relevance. This is a very hard, difficult thing to do. This is sometimes called a prayer to be haunted by the text, because haunting is unanticipatable. So this is what Puran is doing, speaking as. We are extinct. That's the pterodactyl speaking in Puran's imagination. We are extinct by the inevitable natural geological evolution. This is the first, the planetary bit. You too are endangered. You too will become extinct in, and this is the human responsibility part, nuclear explosions, or in war, or in the aggressive advance of the strong obliterating the weak. This is written in the 70s, which finally turns you naked, barbaric, primitive. Are you going forward or back? Think. Forest extinct, animal life obliterated outside of zoos and forest sanctuaries. What will you finally grow in the soil, having murdered nature in the application of man-imposed technology? Deadly DDT greens, even a quote in the middle of the quote, and I can't discuss it now. We would discuss it if we were actually reading together. But for those of you who are into Voloshinon, I will say that this theory of genres by reported speech, there it is. Deadly DDT greens, charnel house vegetables, uprooted astonished onions, radioactive potatoes, explosive bean pods, monstrous and misshapen spastic gourds, eggplants with mobile tails, bloodthirsty octopus creepers, animal blood-filled tomatoes. The national spirit of the ancient nations is crushed. Like nature, this is not Puran, this is the narrator. Like the sustaining earth, their sustaining ancient civilizations received no respect. Recognition didn't happen. They were only destroyed. They are being destroyed. Is this what you're informing us? The gray lidless eyes do not answer. You come up from the past to warn. Are you telling us that this man-made poverty and famine are crimes? This wide space spread thirst is a crime. It is a crime to take away the forest and make the forest-dwelling peoples naked and endangered. Are you telling us that it is a crime to strangle and destroy all voices of protest and the arm of combat? To be able to question to an extent is a way of responding. The eye utters no word. How gray, what amazing eyes. It wants to say something, to give some news. Puran does not understand. No communication point. No word can be said or written. Is there a message in the smell of its body? Why do its eyes look? In the inner shrine room, the worshipped and the worshippers are gone, of the family of a poor tribal who is dead. O ancient one, sitting unmoving, what do you want us to know? The gray eye does not answer. You have come to me for shelter, and I don't know how to save you. Is that why I see your death? I don't know. If I knew, I could have saved you. You would have taken wing and left again. You would have searched and found water, food, shelter. I don't know. If I knew, in this shrine room of stone and earth in the last years of the century, an urgent piece of news that humanity needed to know came to us, and the news could not be given because human beings did not know or understand its language. The grey eye wants to give Puran some news. Critics such as Bruno Latour, Timothy Morton, Margaret Cohen, and Amitav Ghosh have suggested that the rise of the novel, conventionally connected to modernity, can be reconstellated today as connecting to the Anthropocene, the climate change that is bringing the world to its own destruction. Jennifer Wenzel, I quote, Jessie Oak Taylor, Ursula Heise, Sadia Abbas, and others have taken issue. These writers, writes Sangam Ravindranath. She suggests that this criticism of the novel, quote, at the same time imagines the epilogue, the final twist, to a long story about ultimately deceived reading. What you read in the novel is a deception, say these critics, Bruno Latour, Timothy Morton, etc. This story's end would read, I still continue the quote from Ravindranathan, human literature turned out in the end to be carbon emissions' uncannily clever gesture of self-protection, because it's all about human beings. It is, now it's me, it is in complicity with this deceived reading, complicity, folded togetherness, with this deceived reading, that I add my appeal for a more robust practice of reading, harnessing the humanities for the kind of imaginative activism, holding back from planetary that Mahasweta stages in pterodactyl. What I'm proposing through the practice of literary reading is a training of our students' habit of normality, continuing through further teaching and rearing developing a worldwide collectivity, generation by generation, rearranging the ground level affect of greed and parochiality at all ends, intramural, parochial, and greed, self-advancement. I want to be able to say, without accusations of sermonizing, as India Today told me I was doing, that pterodactyl can become a teaching text for such a practice of literary reading. Now I want to come to the end where we show how, now look at the description of its death. The prehistoric animal is restored to the map. The story had begun, I can't go there, by showing us that as Puran looks at the map of that area, Pirtha, it looks like an animal from the age of the Gondwana, when in fact the rift, the great continental rift had not happened and Africa and India were joined together. It looks like a map of that time. And then of course the pterodactyl comes out, but at the end, the prehistoric animal is restored to the map. And this is the description. The body seemed slowly to sink down, a body crumbling on its 4 feet, the head on the floor. In front of their eyes, the body suddenly begins to tremble steadily. It trembles and trembles, very, very detailed, correct description here. It's sinking down, the wings open, they go back in repose. This pain is intolerable to the eye. Pikya goes on saying something in a soundless mumble, moving his lips. He sways, he mumbles, sways forward and back. About an hour later, Puran says, gone. Now it's the map. The actual internment is not described, it's flat. Now it is as it was when all of the top-down workers saw it and discussed development in terms of the animal, as I have pointed out above, which I just talked about. The planetary is restored as it can be done in didactic literary space, but not in our practical everyday, to the worldly. The planetary is restored to the worldly. We can think about developing this space, so our resources and so on. The word planetarity was first used by me in Imperatives to Reimagine the Planet in 1995. My use of planetarity does not refer to an applicable methodology. Those of you who have read Death of a Discipline, which is a book I wrote for United States comparativists, whereas I wrote a book called Reading for students of English literature and comparative literature in India. So the one that was addressed to the US, that says that we can use the planetary approach to comparative literature. Now that is a mistake, but it is what I call an intended mistake. This is the problem with having to act. You cannot accept the impossibility that is given to you in your intellectual understanding or your imaginative understanding of the situation. You cannot act, but you have to reduce it to the mistake of acting. Therefore, what you do is never justified, but it must be done, because otherwise there is disaster. You can't just be completely inactive because you have seen what planetarity represents. I'll come to that in a minute. I just said it because I will have to say it. Okay, so it is my use of planetarity does not refer to an applicable methodology. It is rather the limit to our efforts to save our world. And this you will get in Barbara Cassan's edited and translated by Emily Apter, the book called The Untranslatables, I think. I have an entry on planetarity, and that's different from what I say in Death of a Discipline. It is rather the limit to our efforts to save our world. It is different from a sense of being the custodians of our very own planet, although I'm fully committed to such a sense of accountability present in Mahasweta's text in the description of monstrous vegetation. As Kathy said, I am active in ecological agriculture. Planetarity is not susceptible to the subject's grasp. We can't hold it. Since the human ideal may be to be intended towards the other, I no longer think so. I think it's greed. We provide for ourselves transcendental figurations of what we think is the origin of this animating gift. Mother, nation, God, nature. These are names, nicknames, putative synonyms of alterity, some more otherness, some more radical than others. If we think planet thought in this mode, the thinking opens up to embrace an inexhaustible taxonomy of such names, including but not identical with the whole range of human universals. Aboriginal animism, as well as at the other end, the spectral white mythology of post-rational science. The whole thing can, in fact, begin to inhabit if we think planetary, because we must think it. If we imagine ourselves as planetary subjects rather than global agents, planetary creatures rather than global entities, otherness remains underived from us. It's not our other. It is not our dialectical negation. It is not a not I. It contains us as much as it flings us away. And it's no use telling me, oh, this is just like Advaita Vedanta, because that's what we always do. We romanticize our own pasts. And then I would have to get into, no, why it is not, why it might be, etc. What do we do with it? It contains us as much as it flings us away. And thus to think of it is already to transgress, for in spite of our forays into what we metaphorize as outer and inner space, what is above and beyond our own reach is not continuous with us, as it is not indeed specifically discontinuous. We must persistently educate ourselves into the peculiar mindset of accepting the untranslatable, even as we are programmed to transgress that mindset by translating it into the mode of acceptance. This task is what Puran Sahai, Mahasweta's protagonist, is shown not to understand. He's staged as not understanding this, as we don't. Do not think this acceptance is giving up. Think rather that nothing works if you do not know the limit of your powers. It is to supplement top-down philanthropy with the impossible task of harnessing the humanities robustly into education, because that's what it can give, because it's directed into this other texts. In Mahasweta's narrative, Puran's lack of understanding is given to us, transformed as another improbability, if not impossibility. Puran, the caste Hindu activist, following Shankar, the subaltern activist's behest. This doesn't happen. We are nice to them when we are good, but we don't take commands. And therefore Puran does not write a report for his paper. If I may say it with utmost respect and indeed affectionate devotion, Mahasweta could not do this in life, but her imagination took her further. Yet the report is written in the text, and the rhetoric is of a letter not sent, the figuration. The report is written, but it is not sent, except in fiction, to every reader as he or she animates the text in the existential temporality of reading. What can come of such readings? I have offered you one example. The literary offers no guarantees, perhaps at least an acknowledgement that the first right of those we want to help is the right to refuse. Again, for me, questions. A further acknowledgement that nothing can change without a total epistemological transformation of the state. A call for the humanities beyond the disciplines. An acknowledgement of our limits, which makes practice stronger. You will add to these possibilities, I hope. Now, this is to an extent, have I lost anyone? No, that's it, because I was sure that this would lose people. Please stay as long as you want to. I'm very happy to talk to you. Now, this double bind, this Puran stuff, is very parallel with an epigraph that Mara de Gennaro, who wrote this wonderful book, Modernism After Post-Colonialism, an epigraph that she shares from Virginia Woolf. Let's see if I can find it. Okay, now it should be the next page, shouldn't it? not working as it should work. Surya, are you still there? Surya has to go to his PT. Okay. Now I will read it. I will read it from my book because it's not appearing as it should. Okay, here is the epigraph from Virginia Woolf. There was something strange in the shadow that the flicker of her eyes cast, writes Virginia Woolf in Orlando, something which is always absent from the present. Something which is always absent from the present. And in the middle of it, she puts in a parenthesis, something which, and then there's a parenthesis, as anyone can test for himself by looking now at the sky, something which is always absent from the present, but in the middle is the existential temporality of the person who is reading. You can test it for yourself by looking now at the sky. So there is that's fiction, which is allowed to interrupt this theoretical difficulty with the human, because something is always absent from the present. No, there is something. It's that parenthesis. So this epigraph, in fact, it connects with what I learned from my teachers. This, what Mara in her book very nicely has chosen from Virginia Woolf, that there is something absent from the present. The present, as Hegel would say, is eine differente Beziehung, a relationship that just goes on differing and differing and differing. It's never identical with itself. It moves along. But on the other hand, there is also the interruption of our existential experience. This structure, this I learned from my teacher. And this is why I could connect, coming from the University of Calcutta, I could connect with both de Man and Derrida. The idea that you have, in fact, a position which in fiction you can experience the impossible, and fiction stages a desire. This is Taruk Babu, this is Taraknath Singh, this is my first, and to an extent also Sukumari Bhattaji, who taught me English when I was a science major in the first 2 years. These are and if I get to telling you about my life, you'll see why this teaching was important for me. I might not get to section 3, but at any rate, so their idea was that fiction stages a desire. The text desires something, and when we read badly, we read the text as if it's the fulfillment of the desire. No, that place is open for the reader transactionally to pull the text toward that, and this is an active reading of the text, knowing that it will never be completely possible, a transactional reading of literature. We place ourselves within that space. And so this is because Taruk Babu taught this way. Number one, follow up everything, every documentation. Number two, to understand this kind of staging of desire, it was possible for me to connect to Paul de Man and Jacques Derrida, who in fact also had something of this sort in their work. I'll go back to the Virginia Woolf text, the epigraph, where she says that there is something absent in the present. This is why in the Derridian text, the idea is, and I said this last night as I was discussing Mara, that the thought is the blank part of the text. Most people threatened by these kinds of ideas would laugh, mock. Mockery is the best self-protection, it's a defensive gesture, and move off and do things as they do and contribute to the destruction of the world. Whereas this idea that when we write, we have to be aware that the thinking will be done by someone else as they read. This responsibility that we are not just expressing our thinking, we are writing for the reader, that it's like a relay race. that the reader will pick it up and move it somewhere else. This idea is in the Virginia Woolf text with that little existential paragraph. And that's why last night I was talking about the fact that in Derrida, this is where, since this present is always different from itself as it moves along, I'm different from who I was when I started talking to you. Because it's always different, this différance, that's spelled with an A, when you use it affirmatively, then it becomes the A in the French word avenir, future, avenir, that which is to come. So this transformation, this description of the transaction, this we already learned from Taruk Babu when he was talking about the fact that the text stages a desire and the reader, in fact, moves that desire transactionally by taking responsibility for the text to a certain degree. I still remember how he taught King Lear in this way. The evenings would get darker and darker, and College Street and Harrison Road, I would take the buses. I remember once the bus leaning in one direction so full that I was actually hanging on to someone who was hanging on to the window, and I lost one of my sandals. And I thought to myself, could have taken a taxi, I'll have to buy a pair of sandals. That was Taruk Babu, the incredible experience of Taruk Babu teaching this idea of transactional reading. And therefore, all of history becomes a kind of relay. And there, in Mara's book on page 23, she says that every reading requires, I can't actually put it up, Surya is gone. Every reading, it was such a pleasure discussing her book last night. Every reading requires another. She says, speakers, including narrators, are never in full narratorial command individually. They require others to supplement, modulate, undercut, and transform their stories for more broadly encompassing, but still inconclusive stories of collectivity and creolizing relations to emerge. So I wanted to give you this as the first section. I have no idea what time it is now, 11 a.m., not too bad. So I wanted to give you this. So the summary is that if we are living now within the horror of planetary extinction, which has been brought forward, and therefore we are written by a narrative where our accountability is as nothing, we must still do something, because that's how action is. It denies impossibility and makes an intended mistake and acts. And in this, within this theorizing, not so much theoretical, within this theorizing, which is a practice, within this, I presented Mahasweta's staging of this pterodactyl. I said that if Puran stages this kind of mistake, my mistake is staged in suggesting that in Death of a Discipline, that we can have planetary readings. And this also tells us something which Taruk Babu taught us in Calcutta already, that you judge a writer, you understand a writer in the architectonics of his or her entire work. So the Death of a Discipline has to be read in the context of the impossibility that is denied in it of planetary action. So then I went just a little bit into why this teaching, which comes to me from Derrida, was never my teacher, but certainly Duman was. These teachers I could take in because of the extraordinary teaching that I received at Presidency College and Lady Brabourne College from Sukumari Devi and Taruk Babu. And I quoted some stuff from Mara to show that she's also moving into this notion of history as relay so that you transact. Now, this is my summary. Now, as you can see, I don't have an awful lot of time. So make your questions, and if I haven't been able to explain something, ask me a question. And please make them brief so I can move to the second section, which is on Can the Subaltern Speak? So how will you be asked? Oh, you will just simply raise your hand or ask your question, right?
Well, thank you, Gayatri. I think if people use the hand raising function under reactions, then we'll see them. I can see the order of questions, or perhaps you can too. I'm not sure.
Okay, I do hope that I will be able to.
But I can try to call on people. Let me just change my view here.
Yes, now can I see?
And if you're having trouble figuring it out and you have a question, just speak up at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm not even seeing, so because I'm trying to get to the
Yeah.
things I will have to use next. So Kathy, you recognize people. How long shall we wait for questions to emerge?
Well, maybe I'll just say something. If we don't have any questions yet, so please, if you have a
Then I
question.
can pass on. Then I can move on to this.
Okay, all right, okay.
Okay. So you see, I can't do, you can hear me, right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, I don't seem to be able to get this in the screenshot. If I can, it's called filler_masterclass. I will. Otherwise, I brought it. Filler.
Before you go on, you mentioned that you were talking about this book. I wonder if it's possible for you to give the author and title in the chat so everybody can see it, perhaps?
What book?
You were talking about Mara's text.
Oh, Mara's text. Yes, absolutely. Very happy to do so. So I think, in fact, I have been able to do it in the screen sharing. See? Well, I can't get to the screen sharing. Why?
Yeah, I'm seeing the very top part of it.
See, I'm not seeing anything. So you're seeing the very top part of it?
Yeah, I was seeing you're in the late 80s after
No,
and then
that's
just that
right,
one.
then I can just read it even if.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
here it is. Now we can see it.
okay. Now the name of the book is Modernism After Post-Colonialism. Modernism After Post-Colonialism. And it's written by Mara de Gennaro. Mara de Gennaro. I'm referring to it simply because we had a book launch last night, and and these points were made there. It's a very fine book. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about can the subaltern speak as such? Okay, in the late 80s, this is something that I said to the Marxist feminists, European Marxist feminists, with whom I do collaborate, because I'm very complicit with the Euro-US. It's no use saying, because there are people who come as native informants from India, from Africa, and they just give information about how wonderfully they're doing Marxist feminism in India. They're all the usual suspects. And having done it and then being clapped in the back, it's like a menagerie. You know, you collect animals from each species, they come and tell you how wonderful they are, and so you've become global. I don't like that. So I actually intervene, all right? So what I'm saying here has nothing to do with what I just told you, but this is something that I said to them. In the late 80s, after 2 miasmatic marriages lasting 21 years, I was able once again to pick up on the activist side of my work. Just before this, through a classed metropolitan identity crisis and a rediscovery of colonialism from a left US position. See, this is very common. I'm sure you folks know people, and you are perhaps yourselves these people. You come to the US and as a student, and suddenly you become much more of a Marxist than ever you were at home. This is given that the US Marxism is really, I mean, I have learned a lot. I'm with them, etc. So from the inside, I say it's a bit of a tamasha, except for the democratic socialists who try to intervene. But nonetheless, somehow these places with communist parties, etc., they come to the US and become Marxist. This is a very common thing. I mean, I was coming from West Bengal, and at a moment when the Communist Party was strong and in some senses not that bad, but somehow my leftism had become left US at that point, a rediscovery of colonialism, a class metropolitan identity crisis. This is very common. Since I'm talking about Edward Said, whom I met 4 years before Orientalism was published, he said, actually, I discovered I was Orientalized. That's a magnificent statement of this identity crisis, and it produced something wonderful. But this, I went through it too, I mean, certainly not in the magnificent way that Edward did. I had written such somewhat one-sided finger-pointing works as Three Women's Texts and A Critique of Imperialism and Can the Subaltern Speak? They are bad, we are good. That period came to an end. So this is how I understand that essay. I'm very serious about it, but that period came to an end with a book called In Other Worlds. And now, with institutional work and activist work coming together, I realized that in the current conjuncture, left and right were bound together. They were complicit, folded together. The alliances. Since then, I have no longer been able to practice anything without acknowledging complicity, that I am folded together with the other side. Even paying income tax. From the period of that change came a collection called Outside in the Teaching Machine, which gives me, I said to the Marxist feminists, my title today, Outside in the Funding Machine. We are not ourselves corporatists. We are critics of corporate capitalism, but we are in the funding machine. So I'm not saying we should avoid this, that this is the position that I recognize, the working position. Today, I'm asking ourselves to learn the consequence of being in the funding machine, socially responsible, sustainabilizing, etc., globalized capital, gaining fiscal advantages by top-down philanthropy, practicing corporatism, although we ourselves are outside. So I wanted to read this so that you can see one of the ways in which I situate Can the Subaltern Speak in my own work. So, what I say in those two attachments, which you have read, I hope, and you will ask me questions from, what I say in those two attachments is that Can the Subaltern Speak, therefore, was for me a beginning. Can the Subaltern Speak was for me a beginning. What kind of a beginning? I have written about this many, many times. It was that identity crisis. The identity crisis was, how have I, a Bengali girl, real identity. See, here is my identity on the banks of the Hudson River. How have I, a Bengali girl, become an expert in French theory? I should have been happy because we are constantly signified as, when I asked that question of Edward, as capable of doing nothing. But I'm not an Indianist. My mother had an MA in Bengali literature, which was as good as a PhD in those days. I turned to her when I needed to know something. I am a well-educated Indian person, by being that, and I have an interest in India, I vote in India, all of that stuff. But India as a subject is huge. I'm not an Indianist. I don't know the subject of India, but I'm constantly now put into a box where I'm obliged to speak about India, write about India, etc. This is not fair. Declassified, de-skilled. But at that time I thought, how have I become an expert in French theory? Because I was asked by Yale French Studies to write on French theory. I did write it, but that's a different thing. And how have I become this? So I translated Mahasweta Draupadi for critical inquiry, and I immediately became on spec. So that's where Can the Subaltern Speak comes from. I had a writer's block. I was going to question French theory with my grandmother's sister, and I was not going to reveal it because I did not want people to clap me on the back and say, oh, you're so good because your grandmother's sister was in Onushinan Samiti, etc. So therefore, I also got nothing but hostility. I took away voice from the subaltern and nonsense like that. So this is where Can the Subaltern Speak stands. So what I did was I turned to my family. My family is a middle class family. They're not subalterns. But what I did discover, and especially my grandmother's family, my grandmother's father was a school teacher, they were not, our own family, my mother's father's family was more well-to-do than my grandmother's family, but nonetheless not subalterns. But I discovered something about the subalternity of women, which was, I didn't recognize that was a discovery at that point until I came much later. This is work I'm doing now, very late on the contract, to translate the letters that Gramsci wrote in prison, which have not yet been translated. Gramsci died in 1937, and he wrote these letters to his wife and his sister-in-law, the Schuch sisters, where Gramsci also starts talking about the possibility of gendered subalternity. I didn't realize that I had done something nice and new by doing that in Can the Subaltern Speak. But basically, I was not really approaching subaltern groups. This was my family, it was the middle class. So from there, I moved into, since I began this different life, how to be useful is what I found was my way after those terrifying marriages. Those are very funny stories, but I can't go into them. At any rate, I discovered that what I needed to do was to approach the social groups remote from history, in the margins of history, and therefore walked into the caste system. And there I also realized that I was myself within the ones that have done the harm, so that I had to share. I've said this many, many times. I have to share with the ones I work for and with that I'm their enemy, as I say that that I hope good, and my parents were certainly tremendously anti-casteist. It was caste was, as it were, annihilated in our family, so that it was possible in that time, so late 40s, early 50s. And so that I didn't even know anything much about caste until I entered this life again. And so I would say, I may be good, my parents may be good, but 2 generations is nothing over thousands of years. So you must do without me. This is a very hard lesson to learn. So it is that's where, as I began working for, and in the beginning, I had no idea with my assumptions, benevolent assumptions about humanity in general. I had no idea what happens when for thousands of years you take away the possibility of intellectual labor, punish intellectual labor, reward obedience, and so on. What happens when this is the problem? So therefore, this is a very different situation from the situation that exists in Can the Subaltern Speak. And this work goes on. And from this particular experience, I'm just back from those schools on the 1st, I think I got back. This kind of work shows you that there isn't much chance of succeeding. If you want to succeed in 30 years, you don't undo thousands of years of cognitive damage, but you have to keep working. And there again, the idea of work as relay, work for the philosophers of the future. Many people tell me, oh, my friend also is doing schools. I say, oh, very nice. But this humanities style, imaginatively active schooling, which is not for any other reason at all, which is very, very difficult for the very poor, but they vote to devise a pedagogy of insertion into the intuitions of democracy for the very, very small children. This is an impossible task. I don't know if Anirban Bhattacharjee has clued in. I've asked him I sent him the registration link. If he has, then he will know, because he also is a Brahmin lad, unfortunately, who is trying to undo this in order to enter this space and work for the subaltern, insert the subaltern into citizenship in some way, and not just remain body count for voting. And how impossible it is, he does know. And how much I fail, he does know. And how much I share the fact that I am failing to the people I work with, he does know. So because it can't be something that only you know, etc. So this work, the work to learning from mistakes is very, very important. And the work with subalternity in Africa, where I do not know languages, and the work with subalternity on the border with Jharkhand, it's very different. But certainly in Africa, I try to do the work through an involvement with the unsystematized mother tongues. And I want here to just cite a conversation that I cited last night with someone who is almost my brother, my team worker. When we work together, people don't know who said what when. And we ourselves surprise ourselves by saying the same thing together. And that's Mamadou Diouf, who's a Senegalese origin historian in the history department. He and I, people find this very strange that an Indian post-colonial activist and a Senegalese Africanist and Afro-Americanist activist intellectual should be so together, but this is a joke between us. Mamadou said 2 days ago, as I was talking about how it was important not just to have conferences and classes talking the talk, but try, if you are so concerned, to get into areas where the largest sector of the electorate hangs out. And Mamadou said to me, you know, when the development sector really came into being properly and this restructuring began, it was assumed that Africa could not think. This is Mamadou saying, okay? It was assumed so that Africa was just given body things, you know, clean water, HIV, AIDS, but nothing to relate to quality of education, just things for the body. And I said to him, and again, very, very critically, that of course, the British Empire at least has always created a division between India and Africa and used India in a different way. And in India, we were not told we could not think. We were told, and I'm very, very, I owe something here to Amit Bhadavi, who has actually coined the phrase managerial state, but many people know this. We were told, the state was told, you cannot redistribute, you cannot be constitutional, you have to manage global capital. Your role is to manage, in the restructuring phase, you have to manage global capital. So we became a managerial state, and the state became, the state was shamed by international civil society. I remember talking to Ramila Thapar. At one point I phoned after I'd had a conversation with a very good civil society worker who was in fact in the human rights group at Columbia. And I said to Ramila, I never thought I would hear that the state is incapable of looking after its own citizens, because we, of course, were brought up just after independence in a different thinking, in a different way. So this particular notion that the state is our only weapon, and so the state is both poison and medicine, and that the subaltern must be trained to claim the citizenship that it does not have and become generalizable because it is asked to vote. This is a very different kind of work from the work that I stand behind in Can the Subaltern Speak? And so I would say, if I summarize Can the Subaltern Speak, I was trying to escape from that identity crisis, get out from just being a French theory person. So the first part is a critique of Foucault and Deleuze, not as such, they were very good theoreticians, but I saw that when they were talking to each other, their theory was not part of their thinking. That's what I saw, only that conversation. And that is, of course, the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. So therefore, I went into saying that if you look at the word responsibility in Marx, since they were reading Marx in French translation, they couldn't honor that difference, as indeed we can't in our languages either. So taking a look, and this is Taro Pavu's training also, learn as many languages as you can. We had no foreign language departments. That's another story how I learned languages. But this idea of, if they had read Marx, they would have realized that there are two different kinds of representation. I did all of that. And then I had a writer's block because I was going to, mind you, I was imitating Foucault in Herculine Barbin when I was looking at Bhuvaneshwari Bhaduri in that way. I had a writer's block, but nonetheless, I realized that that simple act of hers, the subaltern resisting, I am not uniquely possessed by a man, I'll wait to menstruate, was totally over against a resistance to the ideal of sati. So therefore, I had to do that simple act of resistance, unrecognizable, had actually needed a psychobiography that was much bigger. The subaltern does act, the subaltern does universalize, but cannot be recognized. So that's why I did all the background work as well as I could with the Dhamshastra, and then came to her story, which was very simple. Although she waited and wrote with her body that I do not belong just to one man, although she wrote a letter to my grandmother to be opened 60 years later, which is why my mother could tell me what she did tell me. As in spite of this, the very well educated, my philosopher cousin, I mean, with whom I talk Kant and Hegel even now, she's 83. She was then, of course, much younger, Tara Chatterjee. She asked me, why are you working on someone who just 2 generations? Why are you working on someone who killed herself because of an illicit pregnancy? I'm enraged because an educated woman in the same family could not hear her. I said, the subaltern cannot speak. It was that's the story. The subaltern there is Bhuvaneshwari Bhaduri. The subaltern cannot speak because within the family, women could not hear her. It has nothing to do with giving voice and taking away voice, crap like that. And the sati stuff there is not about subalternity. It's the psychobiographical background. And Lata Mani, who was a wonderful, wonderful thinker, she mistook me as writing, I quote Megan Morris, can the subaltern talk? No, I was writing, can the subaltern speak? Can the subaltern's speech act be completed by us? That's the summary of Can the Subaltern Speak? And therefore, when Mara Di Gennaro gives as a general epigraph to her book, the thing from one of the stars of creolity, Patrick Chamoiseau, that every land will be native to all. Never again will anyone on this planet have to set foot on a foreign land, nor will anyone remain in the margins of citizenship. Every citizenship conferring on all its graces, and that citizenship caring for the world's diversity cannot decide what cultural luggage and tools it might wish to choose. This, I said, really goes along with the impossible dream that must push, impossible, this is impossible, but it must push the kind of work that I hope in a very small way I do working for the subaltern, failing and learning to learn from mistakes. Taking Can the Subaltern Speak as a kind of somewhat mistaken beginning. This part of the work does not relate to the Subaltern Studies Collective at all. Their task was to redo historiography, and they did it wonderfully well. My task does not relate to redoing anything disciplinary. It's a different kind of work. So that's the summary. And if you, now it's 11:28, we still have some time. If you want to ask a question which relates to the text, remember, I haven't reread the text for you. So please do ask. Otherwise, I will move to the final section, which is my life. Because I don't want to lose, I have lost 5 people. Okay? So I have, in chat, what is there in chat? No, the link. Have to leave. Okay, if you have to leave, then I guess I'm so intellectually insecure that life just happens. All right. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's, we're squeezing into an academic schedule, but
Of course,
yeah.
I give leave to very things that I really like.
Well, this is great. So I don't see any questions right now. So I think unless somebody wants to jump in, go ahead. I'm
Okay.
really eager to have a time to hear your life. So.
Yes, that's fine. Okay, I'm not going to leave meeting, no. What I'm trying to do is to see if I can find that thing. Wait a second. If I can find college Prashango. Okay, now this came, and then I think there is college Prashango right after this. Okay, now this is the general epigraph. Okay. I left. Now, why did I leave? I left India suddenly because I had been very critical of the university as editor of Presidency College magazine. This was in 1960. I got my BA in 1959. Okay, and so I got a first class, but all of this may be completely wrong. Okay, because I didn't know anything. I mean, some of you perhaps will recognize, or most of you will not because you're too young, but some of you will recognize that it was possible in the 40s and 50s to be incredibly super educated. I mean, as my mother, I told you, she was married at 14. My brother was born when she was 15, but my father had the intelligence to recognize that his child bride was an intellectual, not just women should be protected type thing. In fact, my father more or less acknowledged that she might be more intelligent than he, although my father was also quite a brilliant man. And so he protected her. Her father-in-law lived, my father's father lived from East Bengal, lived in the same house. So she really needed protection for her work. But my father protected her so that she could, in fact, get her BA, and then in 1935, and then in 1937, do with Dinesh Singh an MA from the University of Calcutta, although my father was civil surgeon in Dhaka, get her MA. And so we were super educated. My father was born in a village where they only wore a metal ring around their middle until they were 6 or 7 years old, Bunchi, except a little dhuti when they went to school, Patshala, but which they had to often tie on their heads because it was very close to the Brahmaputra where they lived, Ashohala and Natya. And so from that area, they'd never seen sugar, for example. That was the kind of, they had, for sweet, they had batasha, which is the foam on molasses and so on. From that situation, he ran away from home and drank hydrant water and did this and did that. Long story, became a servant, Horatio Alder story, but finally managed to work with Rutherford at Cambridge on radiology. And so, in fact, which is why his degree was DMRE, Doctor of Medicine, Radiology and Electricity, because radiology had not yet been recognized as a medical subject. So these were super educated people, okay? But nonetheless, in such a family, I had no white friends. I didn't know any white people except British Council Debating Circle, and that's another funny story. But at any rate, therefore, I didn't, and dad died when I was 13. So I had really no sense of any kind of work. I mean, I was very smart. I was doing 5 English coachings, making a good deal of money, 400 rupees a month when the house surgeon made 250. My mother never told me that I was making a lot of money. It was a complicated story, but I didn't know anything. And what I thought, I may be incorrect, what I thought was that because of the 5-year plans, if I didn't get a first class in a humanities, or as we called it, art subject, I wouldn't even be given a passport. So I don't know whether this was correct or not, but and unless I could pay my way, and especially since we were not poor, but certainly I could not. I mean, to be poor in West Bengal means something else. We were certainly not poor, but I was earning my keep, giving my mother 300 rupees, and she would give me 100. But I realized that if I didn't get a first class in my MA, I thought I would not be able to go abroad at all. And I was a student of English. So in 1960, I was 18 years old, but I was very bold and brave. I wrote just 3 sentences. I mean, it was a long editorial. And when Tarbabu read it, he told me that I had jeopardized my chances for a first class in my MA. So, I mean, I'll just read my own translation quickly. I did yesterday. It is no exaggeration to say that when graduates of our college step into the university, their eagerness and efforts for learning are quickly taken out of focus. They confront a terrifying impersonality in the place of the intimate professor-student relationship of Presidency College. The university was made largely responsible for this uncomfortable situation at the last Founders' Day. We hope that if the state claims its own rights in this matter, the university will accept those claims. So Tarubabu told me that I had no chance. So therefore, what I did was I actually went to Cornell. I mean, I didn't realize that Shukriyo Banerjee, who was part of the debating circle and worked for USIS, that I could go to his office and ask him about grants, etc. It just didn't click to me. Shukriyo Banerjee was just someone in the debating circle, and I was a better debater than he was. That's all I knew about him. And no networking, no nothing. I was 18 years old. I had to get out. So I only knew the names of 3 universities, Harvard, Yale, and Cornell. And I thought Harvard and Yale were too good for me. So this trunk call was an international call that you had to book. So I booked this call at Ballygunge Post Office, which was 1 block from my house. And I had to hang around because I didn't know when the trunk call would come. So when it came, I spoke to Professor Anthony Caputi, who was at the time in charge of admissions. And I told him I was a very good student. I was the best student at the university. I'd come first class first. So that was okay. I would need no financial aid because I had borrowed money, which I haven't come to it yet. And so can I be admitted? I took none of those exams. And later, Mr. Caputi and everybody at Cornell, all my teachers would laugh. They said, nobody has ever been admitted in the way in which Gayatri was admitted. But so I was 20 years old. And so but I won't tell the whole story there, how I borrowed money on a life mortgage and this and that. But I'm quite sure there was no life mortgage at that time. But what did I know? And I borrowed it from an unknown person whose name I had heard as a philanthropist. That's another story. But at any rate, in my second year, because my native language was not English, I received no financial aid. I was 20 years old. I had no visa, no work permit. I was about to be deported and was saved because Professor Paul Deman had 1 fellowship which he hadn't yet filled. And this is why my languages are so poor, because I had to have, because at that stage in an Ivy League college, if you were doing a complete PhD, I was in English. My only foreign language really was English. So if you were doing a complete PhD, you were not allowed to take language classes because you were supposed to know the languages. So my French was 1 semester of French in 1960. at the Alliance Française in Calcutta because there was no French department. So this is why I say to people when they say, oh, there's no possibility of learning any languages where I am, I said, if you try, you can learn it. And my German was at 13 years old, 3 months with Mrs. Bhaduri, Irmgard Bhaduri, who was the German widow of a Bengali freedom fighter who was incredibly casteist herself. She, in fact, she taught me from those old-fashioned print German books so that I can, in fact, buy complete works in that old-fashioned print because I can read it. Many people can't. And so therefore, anyway, that's all the German I had, 3 months at 13. So I told Diman that I would become a graduate student if I didn't have to write my papers in French and German. I mean, classes were often in French and German. Texts were all read in French and German. It was very hard. That's how I entered comparative literature. So, in other words, the United States Humanities Academy had not yet learned diversity. It was 3 years before Lyndon Johnson took off the quota system and changed the Alien Registration Act, and Asian immigration was quadrupled, this 100% is it. It was quadrupled, the well-known brain drain. Diversity became a recognizable issue. So then I wanted to show another thing, which I hope I will be able to see in this filler, which is how yes. And so I came to the United States. Why did I come to the United States? Because I didn't want to take, I mean, you know, I was, this was 1960, right? Immediately post-colonial. And I thought it was very racist that I would have to take another BA. You know, I said, well, this is a fantastic university. I came first class first. Why the hell would I take another BA? I won't do it. See, nobody gave me any advice, basically, because I couldn't tell mother that I was just buzzing off in the middle of my MA, you know. And I told her even a lie. I said I had gotten a Metropolitan scholarship. Actually, I had borrowed the money from Metropolitan Insurance Company on a life mortgage. So, but I told Ma, well, once I went there, Ma, I told you a lie. It was, I borrowed the money. I paid back. Don't worry about it. Anyway, so I was full of us. I didn't realize, and this is from a piece that I have just revised for the wonderful journal called Future Anterior. If you want to look for it, it's in the list that I have. It's called City Country Agency. City Country Agency. Okay, and what it says is in 1963, at the age of 21, I was completely undone by the religiosity of the expatriate Hindu middle class. I spoke to a monk friend of mine, Swami Pavitrananda, who was then in his 60s, a skeptical, good man, gentle good man of considerable intellectual rigor. I said to him, I cannot believe, and indeed I'm so disgusted with the religiosity of my own class and group that I declare that I have no connection with all this. He said very gently, where will you go? Your adhyayana, in Sanskrit, literally upward mobility through intellection, in Bengali concentrated study, is your tapasya, spiritual practice of austerity. You cannot, in other words, escape your historical staging. 30 years later, I discovered that tapasya, from tap to heat, this Bimal Krishnamurti actually taught me this, did also mean heat producing, sweat generating labor, a luxurious metaphor for my sedentary trade. Imagine my tremendous disappointment in learning last month, I wrote Future Anterior, from the very first couple of words in a 19th century book on educational theory and practice, written in Bengali by a man who worked for the British educational system, Bhudev Mukherjee, for those of you who know more than I the history of Bengali education, that the word uttered by my friend the monk were a formulaic description of the responsibility of students. Next year, 3 years out of India, I received an assistant professorship at the University of Iowa. I was scared. I went again to this gentle friend. I said to him, I do not know how to teach at a university. I'm a very young person. He said, remember, you're a paid servant of your students and you must perform the service as best as you can. I assure you, I ponder that remark every day as my heart removes itself more and more from teaching in the US. This I wrote long ago. My heart is completely also in teaching in the US. Don't worry about it. This is no longer, you see, I write here. This is no longer true 30 years later at the time of revision. The difference between teaching at Columbia and teaching in Bihum where my 4 elementary schools for the children of the landless, illiterate Dalits are located, has become a lesson in conjunctural nuance. And don't you ever think, he had added, that you're a guru. If you think that you may be one, you have proved to yourself that you're not. If I feel I'm making a difference and changing people's minds, expressing myself as myself, it is sure proof that nothing is working. And I hear people come to me talking about how they're changing people's minds, etc. And inside I laugh, because the proof that they offer is not proof. Now disfigured by a cultic reputation, as well as the envy of self-styled gurus here and there, I know the old man was right. It is, I fear, with this digested skepticism about Guru Varga that I look at great men, architect, artists. The point I'm also making is that my absolute rejection of Hindutva and my distaste for ethnic fictions fabricated as a sales pitch are produced from within, whatever that might mean. So this situation, the situation of wanting to, as it were, pay ancestral debts, which is something I also say to the my co-workers in my schools. But mind you, not therefore to romanticize them, because what happens, as I've also said to them, again, if anyone is here, he knows how many times, that we have money. And since there are only 2 castes, rich and poor, we have money and they don't. When they begin to get some money, upward class mobility, as a result of these 35 years of education, very carefully, it's not income producing, that's not what we teach, but nonetheless, recognition, upward mobility, all of that is happening. They're not dumb. That's why they're my co-workers, right? I choose, as I would choose here at Columbia if I were on a search committee. And so they become quite involved in, getting inserted into the circuit of capital. And so therefore, one has to completely stop romanticizing them. So that's a different issue, and I'm not going to go there, because from here, in order to end, I'm going to take you somewhat without transition to Du Bois and Islam. Now, let me see if I can find what I'm looking for. I think I have to stop share, and I think I have to share screen again to go fill it. This is the one, I think. No, this is the one. No, this is, oh, yeah. You see, I got confused because my own file and the file that Surya made, the names are too, let me see, talking to it, this is the one. Okay. No. No. Okay, I can't find it here, so I'll just go to I'll just go to my own. Yes, there you are. Now, there are basically mostly diasporic Muslims, but also Muslims from North Africa, who relate to Du Bois, and generally speaking, they don't expect Du Bois to have anything to do with Islam, as indeed when he was in the United States, he didn't particularly, and there was no reason for him to. And so they find help in Du Bois through Du Bois's idea of double consciousness, that he was both an American and a Negro, his word. So that's where they go in order to find some practical support in Du Bois's writing. But double consciousness has really almost become trivialized. You remember O.J. Simpson's lawyer claimed double consciousness. But what Du Bois did all his life was one of the things about Du Bois was that even into his 90s, he was very, very changeful. So he actually grew all through the years. And so he moved from one kind of teaching to another. And in every stage of his teaching, he was constructing a a studentship rather than just simply teaching. This is the philosophy that I try, failing constantly, to somehow use at my schools. That is to say, bodha, khali shekha noy, not that thing that I said at Coimbra, not just knowing, but then moving from knowing to learning. So what I'm trying to do at this point is see what kind of readership he was trying to construct after all of his work in the United States, when he finally went at Nkrumah's invitation into Ghana in his 90s, in 1961, when he was 93, and asked to begin constructing an Encyclopedia Africana. For Du Bois, an encyclopedia was not just an encyclopedia. He was at the same time constructing readership in all kinds of different ways. But one of the places where I'm at now is how much he was trying to make the reader, to make the user of the Encyclopedia Africana there, as he was buying books for the encyclopedia, how much he was trying to make the reader aware of the great Islamic Ifriqiya, the great Islamic imperialism before, and very different imperialism, very intellectual, mind you, with problems, but nonetheless, well before the European, and how the European imperialism, in fact, stopped it. And so I look at the various books that I do a study of the collection, small collection, we're going to do it, but I make a study of the collection to work this out. And so, mind you, there are many other things that Du Bois also tries to emphasize. It just so happens that I'm now involved in the area of Islam, and having dealt with Flora Shaw's book, The Tropical Dependency, I come to the collections of European exploration of Africa before colonialism, from mercantile capitalism, then economic industrial capitalism. This is the collection. And I'm sorry for all the 3 stars, because it's just something, those I'll have to fill out. Okay, and in the one that I had for screen share, all of that was not there. So in the collection of books presenting European exploration, I've chosen to touch on Henry Barth, because he is reputed as a 19th century book, German explorer, who went from His Majesty's government in Bombay, Her Majesty actually, because he is reputed to be unique, Barth is, in his knowledge of African languages and Arabic, this is in the collection, and his real desire to enter the space of African Islam in their own way. Mind you, this is something that I write about in the paragraphs above. These folks were, both he and Flora Shaw, Lady Lugard, even in a worse way, they were very negative about the Bantu. You know, that they were cannibals, they were ignorant, they were hardly animals, they were being pushed towards the south. And Du Bois has a great deal of material on the Bantu and the richness of Bantu heritage, the Bantu languages, also right there. So that is not here. But so Du Bois is trying to construct a very different kind of readership, even as he's writing about Africa, which, you know, the world in Africa and so on, and that's his Africa. But this Africa is not just the origin, as it is in A Shadow, as it is in Souls of Black Folk, which was, of course, 60 years before this. So in the collection of, okay, I give here just a couple of passages to give a sense of the man from Bath, who knew Arabic, knew Fulani, knew quite a few of the African languages. My own judgment is that a collection cannot construct a readership without pedagogy. And judging from Du Bois's practice from youth to prime, I think it is safe to say that Du Bois was also of this mind. He was doing his best at this stage in his 90s, preparing us for a relay, writing in the propaganda or permanently persuasive mode. I would say that this unique collection should be supported by a teaching facility where scholars come globally to match the global vision of this aging giant. Now, what is propaganda or permanently persuasive mode? I will end with that if I can find the, there, no. Isn't there another one? No, I can't find the other one. Okay. Yes. Okay, there we go. That's the part. So when he, when well-known comment on the new direction of his work, 1899, while he was teaching at Atlanta University, after he heard that brutally lynched Sam Holt's knuckles were on display in a shop window. I quote, very well-known passage. Two considerations thereafter broke in upon my work and eventually disrupted it. First, one could not be a calm, cool, and detached scientist while Negroes were lynched, murdered, and starved. And secondly, there was no such definite demand for scientific work of the sort I was doing. He says he entered propaganda then. Gramsci's words are permanent persuader. The new intellectual cannot just know something, but must be a permanent persuader. So what I have done in this section is I have tried to write an introduction to, which is I have one introduction which is written in the proper introduction way, and then I write an introduction to in the mode of propaganda, then permanently persuading. So I say in the passage that where I suggest that there should be an institute which teaches the Voices collection, that I'm writing in the mode of propaganda and permanent persuasion. It's a very different kind of writing from the normality of writing that we are invariably taught. You know, topic, sentence, and then your own little idea is proved by whatever you're reading, etc. So, to an extent, that's the end of that. I've had some more stuff, but I think that won't really fit. So let me just give a summary. Let me see what time it is. Well, it's actually only 5 minutes, so I won't give a summary. If in the last 5 minutes you want to ask a question, just ask.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Gayatri. I will leave it open for questions for a couple of minutes. I had so many thoughts along the way. I'm sure everybody else did too, but just wanted to hear you speak. So, so please, anybody have a thought? Let it be intellectual, let it be reactive, propaganda, however you feel like reacting.
I don't mind. I mean, this was a very disorganized, long talk. So if you don't have a question, you're not offending me in any way. 5 minutes is not enough time. I'm sorry for that.
Well, you've covered a tremendous amount. I think it's and you know, really conveyed you and your work in a way that I don't think would have gotten if you had simply focused on an article or two, but just the, you know, sort of interweaving of your own being in the world with it, I think tremendously enriched it.
Well, thank you for listening. It's so at first I gave you pterodactyl and planetary. In the middle, I gave you Can the Subaltern Speak as a beginning, coming from an identity crisis, leading to the working for the subaltern. And finally, I gave you a sense of how I came to the United States. I learned very little in my graduate school because of 3 years, and I got an A+ average because I knew how to take exams. I was asked to choose my own courses, but since that's the one thing I didn't know, since our exams were all papers, I just had a good time. And then I became an assistant prof. So therefore, I'm made by Calcutta University and St. John's Diocesan Girls High School, about which I've written elsewhere. So that's where I'm at. And I have only an Indian passport. I don't know why, frankly. Now it's very useful teaching in the areas that I teach. You can't do it on a visa-based basis. And second of all, because I vote. So that's it. And I believe it's 11:58.
Yes.
So shall I say goodbye and thank you all?
Yeah, well, let us thank you. It's been an amazing experience, and I look forward to talking to you more and being able to share some of the thoughts that that I had along the way. And thinking, just I want to add one more thing though, that you know, your positioning and your situation and the situation of the academy were very different when you were going through, say, your experience at Cornell and moving into an assistant professorship. And I think the students listening today are facing an academy that is in many ways shrinking, where the job market is just horrific. And so, you know, I hope that we can support you all as you go through the process of learning your own sort of selves in terms of being able to follow a path, make mistakes along the way, and yet follow a path that allows you to express yourself in the world.
When I began teaching in 65, the university was the faculty. And the faculty was responsible for students who were transitory, who were not there, who came and went. And the administration supported the faculty. The university was the faculty. Slow change, 78, Reagan, Bush, all of that stuff, everything taken away. Slowly now, university is the administration. And there are many, many executive vice presidents of great, huge salaries. And the faculty reports to the administration, accounts for how much work they're doing. It's a very different situation. There is even faculty censorship of a certain kind, as I find out when I'm told, no, this is not what we say at Columbia. So it's a very different situation. And the students are being trained through STEM for a different kind of industrial involvement. They're rewarded for passing their work into industry, etc. It's a very different kind of situation that we have. And communal development basically means that kind of insertion into this. So we are, to an extent, even trying to ace the UN, as it were. So, but the UN is the UN, and we are a university. University is not just only a corporation. It's a private university is also a corporation. I'm realistic. That's a private university. But so that's, I would say, the way in which the university has changed. And as for what to do with students, that's a double bind too, 1201 now, because I cannot believe that university education is only vocational. On the other hand, the greatest degree of emphasis is now placed only on that part of education. Education certainly should also be something that allows you to live. I'm not earn a living. I'm not against that. But to put the entire emphasis, as we do, always only mock interviews, this, that, and cut your dissertation down to what is marketable, etc. Life is long. It's a difficult situation to be in, but I'm an optimistic person. I think we should just keep on trying and locating the people whom we can make listen, whom we can make listen. You know what I mean? But that's our responsibility. We listen. I must be able to access them rather than talk for 2 hours and leave no room for questions. I disappoint myself.
Well, I think the responsibility of organizing, of I mean, even that, just, I know we're over time, but you know, in Columbia, for example, your point about the you know, universities as corporations, it's only in the last few months that faculty have found something of a voice that transcends their departmental disciplinary boundaries,
Yes.
responding to the corporation. And of course, we know that graduate students have
Yes.
found a voice, but we'll see where it goes.
The earth is shaking. A specter is haunting
Yes.
the university. But I hope it is able to haunt the university and doesn't fizzle out. You know,
Yeah.
Occupy Wall Street fizzled out because it was so focused on itself.
Right.
But this is going to be, I hope, something the slightest bit different. I'm sorry I'm nearly 80 years old. I want to be young in front of
Young and out there,
I
right?
jump in, but no longer. The
Yes.
body, Sharira Naam Maharaj. Jemni Agya Temni Kaas. The body is king. You have to obey its commands. That's my situation now.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. And we've all really enjoyed it. Okay. Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye.